Welcome back to World Affairs in Context, everybody. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you so much for being here. Recently, we've been hearing many threats or promises, depends on your perspective, of course, about President-elect Donald Trump imposing tariffs on everything that moves, quite literally. He's told the BRICS plus bloc countries that if they choose to settle transactions in currencies other than the US dollar, then he would impose 100% tariffs on their imports into the United States. Then in late December, Donald Trump issued an ultimatum to the European Union stating that it must increase its purchases of US oil and gas or face consequences in the form of tariffs on the bloc's exports that include goods such as cars and machinery into the United States. I would like to address my subscribers who live in the United States right now. Would you like for prices on everything to go up once Trump takes office? Because this is not anti-Trump. That is precisely what these tariffs would do domestically. Absent alternative routes to secure imports of these goods into the United States at the same price point, or start manufacturing here in the United States domestically, which, as we know, we cannot do because our infrastructure, among many other things, it's just not ready. So tariffs will increase prices for the end consumers. Are you ready to pay double or even triple what you pay right now? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Trump appears to be ready to double down on policies of his former predecessors. Biden escalated trade wars with China, and Trump is now set to take it to a whole new level. Let's take a more detailed look at 3 key proposals that were made by Donald Trump recently. To begin with, Trump demanded the elimination of the U.S. negative trade balance with Europe through massive purchases of American oil and gas. Otherwise, he threatened to impose tariffs on European exports to the United States. Secondly, according to Financial Times resources, Trump's team demanded that the Europeans increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. Thirdly, the same Financial Times resources reported that Trump intends to continue support for Ukraine. However, he does not rule out the possibility of ending the war. In fact, he stated it many times, although, of course, he will pursue his own interest, and whatever proposals are made on his behalf, such as NATO troops occupying part of Ukraine as so-called peacekeepers, that will be rightfully rejected by Russia and those who don't want Ukraine to turn into Afghanistan 2.0.
NATO allies, and NATO have been there since 2014, trained, equipped, and supported the Ukrainian armed forces.
The last point, there are quite contradictory signals that are coming from Trump and his team regarding the war and the overall policy towards Ukraine. For example, when asked whether he invited Ukraine's Zelensky, and I hesitate to call him president because his presidential term actually expired in the spring of 2024 and he canceled elections, as you know. So when Trump was asked whether he invited Ukraine's Zelensky to his inauguration in January of 2025, Trump responded that he had not, and he clearly had no intention to invite Zelensky. But then he added that if Zelensky just happens to be in the neighborhood and wants to stop by, Trump would be happy to have him. Take a look.
Did you invite Zelensky to the inauguration?
No, but if he'd like to come, I'd like to have him. I mean, I didn't invite him, no.
There are many more unknowns with regard to Trump's stance on the EU. For instance, Elon Musk publicly supported Germany's Alternative for Deutschland, a party that is completely against any aid to Kiev. Musk himself often expressed skepticism on the matter, and he clearly said that he would be against supporting Kiev and against not negotiating some type or some form of peace. Many other members of the elected president's team have also voiced similar views. Without a doubt, there is a struggle within Trump's circle over approaches to Ukraine. So statements from different parts, from different factions within this team should not be taken as a final position. Things change very quickly nowadays until Trump announces his definitive stance. Why is this important, you may ask? Well, this is important because Trump's stance on adjusting relations between the US and the EU will drive how much continued support is provided to Zelensky and to his regime to continue the war. Let's start with the main point. European countries' defense spending increases, which is one of the requests or demands that was made by Trump. This is Trump's favorite topic, by the way, where he constantly argues that the United States is not obliged to bear the lion's share of NATO's defense costs, and that NATO allies should really carry as much of that burden as they can. They should carry a much larger portion of the expenses to relieve the burden on Americans. While the majority of those in the United States would likely support this idea, let's be honest, NATO cannot exist without the support of the United States. The United States is the backbone of NATO. So Trump's commentary does put into question how many more of its purely offensive projects NATO will be able to entertain in the future and how far it will be able to take them. With a considerable political crisis in Europe now, there are many unknowns. Germany is heading to early elections. I discussed this in my recent video. You're welcome to watch it for more details. And in France, the government has been dismissed. The situation in the United Kingdom is also very tense with regard to the budget. At the same time, demanding that the EU countries shoulder 5% of their GDP on defense spending is a very, very ambitious request. The United States spends less than 3.5% of its GDP on defense. Russia, for comparison purposes, which is engaged in a full-scale war against the collective West, allocated nearly 6% of its GDP for military purposes this year, and it is set to increase its military spending budgeting to 6.3% the following year. So now, knowing that information, we can conclude that 5% is essentially the defense budget of a wartime country. The question then becomes, is NATO preparing for a full-scale war in the near future within the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, if it agrees to hike up its defense spending to 5%? The answer to that question will be very telling in my personal opinion, because at this time, no NATO country spends 5% of its GDP on defense. Germany and France, for example, spend just north of 2%. Italy and Spain spend less than 2%, and they are unlikely to support doubling down on that effort. Increasing defense spending by the EU countries might be favored by US politicians. I have no doubts about that, but it will be a very difficult conversation domestically for those countries. It will likely result in a political turmoil within those European countries, as their populations do not want to go to war with Russia despite the propagandized Russophobia. Europe is likely to be unable to meet Trump's demands as far as defense budget increases go, as well as purchases of more expensive energy resources from the United States at the expense of their own population. The deindustrialization of Western economies over the past few decades, the deterioration of their competitive position on the global market in many sectors, losing to China as far as the market share goes in many sectors, and the desire to maintain high living standards and social programs led to a colossal increase in the money supply of both the dollar and the euro. The process especially escalated during the pandemic, as we know, when Western economies and households were essentially flooded with money. By the time the war in Ukraine began, both the United States and the EU were already burdened with enormous external debt, while the war in Ukraine, in general, has been very positive for the United States economy. American oil and gas flowed to the European markets, pushing Russian exports out, and demand for American weapons increased as well. For the United States, the disaster has been a win because it also enabled European leaders to completely give up their sovereignty, and for Europe, it's been nothing short of a nightmare. Trump, as it appears, is set to drive the US dominance as far as he can at the expense of all other players, even allies. Will he succeed? That remains to be seen, and one thing is certain at this point: waging economic wars, implementing tariffs will hurt the US population, while foreign actors will be forced to accelerate their transition away from the weakening hegemon. Thanks for watching. Leave me a comment below. Let me know what you think about these things that I just discussed. Please remember to show your support. It goes a long way. Like, subscribe, and share. For more content, make sure that you check out my alternative social media channels. And I will see you back here soon. Take care.